Welcome to the latest episode of Surgeons' Lives. I'm your host, John Monson. My guest today is Professor Frank Smith, who is a professor of vascular surgery and education at the University of Bristol, as well as being a vice president of the Royal College of Surgeons of England. Frank is a Midlander, being born and brought up in Birmingham, before spending a year as a young child in San Diego, where his father was spending a sabbatical year in anesthesia. He went back to the UK and did his medical school in Birmingham before landing his first academic job in Bristol in the academic surgical unit being created by the late John Farndon. He's been there ever since. Frank has a range of extracurricular activities, including skydiving and a pilot, but perhaps he is best known for his dedication to the world of education and particularly changing surgical training. All of this is covered in this fascinating podcast, and I hope you will take the opportunity to like and subscribe to the channel and send us your comments. So without further ado, let's go across to the conversation with Professor Frank Smith. I'm John Monson, and this is Surgeons' Lives.
Well, listen, so thank you very much for joining this little episode of Surgeons' Lives. I appreciate you taking your time.
No, thank you for asking.
As I'm sure you've gathered from other episodes, it's not major inquisition or very deep or profound, but it's really my attempt to show people that surgeons are more than just the CV and how many operations they've done and one thing or another. So I usually say to people, and no reason why to change with you, to start me off with the words, I was born in.
Yes, indeed. And I have watched one or two episodes. So I was born in the most mundane of places, in Birmingham, in the United Kingdom. My parents were both doctors. So in fact, I come from a bog standard middle class background. My parents were both anaesthetists. My mother was German. She'd come across at the end of the war. As a Catholic, she'd not had a very good time during the war in Germany, and she did a degree in Bonn and then came to Ireland, did her qualifications in Ireland, in Dublin, and then went to Cardiff, where she met my father, who was a senior registrar in anaesthetics. And then they eventually moved to Birmingham, where my dad took up a job at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Birmingham. So I was born in Birmingham at the Women's Hospital. At the Women's Hospital there, and I grew up initially in Birmingham at junior school. We had a very good year. One of the most formative years, I think, in my childhood was my dad taking up a position for a year as a visiting professor in San Diego in anesthesia, where he worked with Marshal Orloff, who was a liver surgeon at that stage. We had a great year. He bought a Cadillac. We lived in La Jolla in a little wooden shack, and I can still remember the mosquito fly net door opening, the aluminium door swinging. You know, you have those noises. We had orange trees in the back garden, the odd king snake and hummingbirds, and that was fantastic.
And at what age were you at that stage?
I would have been about 8 or 9, 1968. That would have been around that time. And he bought an old Cadillac, and when he wasn't working, which wasn't very often, he would pile us in the Cadillac at a weekend, and we'd go and travel 1,000 miles. You know, we went around Arizona, Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, and we'd be back home in time for him to be back at work on Monday. So that was very formative. We spent a lot of time on the beach, to skimboard, rudimentary surfing. And I came back with a great love of America, actually, which has persisted along the way, as it obviously has with you, John, because you are a resident.
You may have spotted that one of my previous guests was Mark Orloff, who's
I
Marshall.
hadn't seen that.
Yeah, so Marshall's son, who was a colleague of mine and remains a very good friend of mine from my time in Rochester. Mark being a very different personality to his late father.
Yeah.
A lovely man, Mark, actually, and as he said, he grew up in San Diego, obviously, and it was, as he said, it was just idyllic.
Well, it's a small world because the Orloffs looked after us very well. I think Mark's sister also reached eminence in medicine in the US. And we spent quite a lot of time around at the Orloffs' house. So Mark and I would have actually been about the same era and would have known each other as kids at that stage.
There you go. So
But I haven't seen him for, the best part of 55 years, I think.
both of you, both of you have now made it to be podcast guests.
Well, I've been striving to do that ever since I joined surgery, John.
Of course. So back in Brum,
Yeah, yeah. Eventually, I went away to school. I went to boarding school. My parents didn't send me away with any enmity. I think they thought it was actually going to be good for us, and it was a great place. I went to a place called Oundle in Northamptonshire, and it was a great place for developing independence. I think I did very little work while I was there. I had a great time doing sport, swimming and water polo, a little bit of time in the cadet corps and school shooting. I remember going to Bisley once or twice and, having the sort of fun you do. And then come to the end of that, I flunked my A levels, catastrophically. I think I got BDE, so my application to medical school was refuted. I was offered a very generous place in dentistry at the London hospital, but I thought it was probably time to do some work at that stage.
but
So
you already knew you were going to be a doctor.
I sort of had a clue. I'll take you back a step. In in something you couldn't do nowadays. My dad took me into the hospital when I was
Yeah.
13. He worked back in the Queen Elizabeth. He worked with Leon Abrams and David Clark, who were the cardiac surgeons at that stage. And the first operation I ever saw was an emergency mitral valve replacement, which started at 11 o'clock at night and finished with a bad outcome at 7 o'clock in the morning. As we've all seen the big operations that didn't work out, and
Yeah.
this didn't work out. But it was pretty formative in terms of introducing me to surgery. And then I had 2 summers working as a theatre porter. I would recommend to anybody that there's nothing better than working as a theatre porter to discover A, how a hospital works, and
Yes.
B, how to get on with everybody in that hospital, and to recognize the role of the cleaner, the people who make the hospital run, who you don't always meet as a surgeon.
Yeah.
And that's been a great education.
I spent a summer as a porter in a hospital in Dublin, and I always remember the guy, my mentor, teaching me how to get rid of large amounts of cardboard boxes, which was, you'd take them away from, and
Yeah.
he explained to me that if you get into the lift or the elevator with all of these boxes and just go down a couple of floors, just the next floor you arrive at, just get out. And leave them there because nobody knows whose they are.
Yeah. Well, I remember the names of the guys who sort of looked after me at that stage. And it was just like that. But the
Exactly.
great thing was that over 8 weeks in the summer, you got to go into every theatre. So I saw, uh,
Yeah.
you'd take the patient to theatre, so you got the rudimentary of communication skills. You had to talk to patients, reassure them, without even realizing you were doing it at the time. Um, and then you got the privilege of going into theatre and seeing cases. I saw ENT, cardiac, neurosurgery, orthopedics, all major GI operations, and that was completely formative as well. And really, after that, I didn't consider any other aspect of
Yeah.
medicine once I got
So
into.
you resat your A levels?
I resat the A levels and surprisingly passed them at a very moderate, just enough to get into
Yeah.
Birmingham University. And having been away at school, actually, I was happy enough to go back to Birmingham.
Yeah.
And I had a great
Just
time.
going back to your archetypal childhood, being dispatched to the boarding school, etc. That tends to produce um, one of two outcomes, as in those that as very much enjoyed it as you did and found it very a learning experience, a very beneficial experience, and the opposite, of course, for people who found it the most psychologically traumatic and you might even say damaging experience. Obviously, you were lucky enough to have the former experience, but
Yeah.
uh, as an objective viewpoint, are you a fan of dispatching young children to the care of rank strangers for several weeks?
No, and I had a chance to meet up with some fellow pupils from school recently, and a couple said exactly the same as you did. They had the most awful time at school,
Yeah,
and in fact, all the things you hear about that can happen at public school happened to them, and that was an eye opener to me because that went on, or must have gone on in the background. I think, as in any institution, if you find something that your peers will respect you for, you're probably better protected. And I just happen to be reasonable at swimming and water polo, and that sort of
right.
gave me a little bit of protection in my time, I think, at school.
Yeah, yeah,
But I can quite see the other thing. When we had children and we came to thinking about their education, and even suggested to my wife we might consider boarding schools, she would have none of that. So our kids have been
yeah.
brought up at schools near us.
So, fast forward, medical school, Birmingham. You did enough in your A levels to get in, and I'm
Yeah.
guessing you did enough during medical school, obviously, to get out again.
Again, close shaves some of the time, but medical. I mean, I'm sure for you it was the same. Medical school was just a great time. Just fantastic all the way through. Good friends. I enjoyed studying, but I didn't study hard, and it threw up a hundred different opportunities. I mean, you're interested in things outside surgery. I think that's part of what these
Yeah,
podcasts are about, and that's what happened to me. At Freshers' Fair, I discovered the Parachute Club at university, which was run by a fifth year medic who I'm still in touch with. He's now in his 70s. And so I joined that, and having seen the Red Devils jump into our local park at some stage, and by the end of that first term, I think I had 18 jumps. And by the time I left medical school, I got about 800 jumps and was an instructor for the British Parachute Association.
goodness.
But I also tripped over the University Air Squadron in the first term and joined that. And so I spent a very pleasurable 6 years at university because I did a BSc in pharmacology, flying with the University Air Squadron. And by the end of that time, we'd finished the syllabus, and I'd flown aerobatics, low level formation flying, and I got about 150 hours of flight time. So med school was something of an open university degree because there
Yeah,
was quite a bit of
yeah.
swimming and water polo in there as well.
Did you,
Um,
with your 800 jumps, did you get into skydiving or?
yeah, it was all skydiving. Beyond the first four or
Yeah,
five static lines, it was always free fall. And in fact, it was competitive skydiving, and a couple of times I ended up representing GB for different competitions. We
yes,
went to the British Collegiate the World Collegiate Parachute Championships representing the UK. And the British Parachute Association sent us, our sponsorship was a set of tracksuits. And we arrived in Orlando in Florida and then drove down to find we were competing against the United States Air Force Academy,
of
who
course.
arrived in their own Hercules with a twin otter. And after looking at each other rather circumspectly, we had this great competition over Christmas in down in Florida, and made a lot of friends. I came back with a load of U.S. Air Force Academy T-shirts, and we had a good time. It was a lot of fun.
I always remember the late Norm Macdonald, the comedian, referring to competitive jumping. As he said, there's only two prizes. There's the champion and there's stuff on rocks.
It was a little bit better than that, but I've made a lot of friends over the years, and I mean, I've kept it up to this time. I still do the occasional jump, a few fewer nowadays, but
Now,
uh,
when did surgery first cross your radar screen?
oh, from the time, really, from the time I was in med school, I came out when I qualified.
You
I think I
knew.
wrote in the yearbook that I would either wanted to. I was very arrogant little sod at that stage, probably still am, but I think my wishes were to be a professor of surgery. That was very far in the distance, or an RAF fast jet pilot. And since that was still on the cards at that stage, those were what I thought were the two options in life. And I was very lucky at surgery. I had a house job at the Queen Elizabeth, working with Tony Barnes, and half of it in ENT, which I really enjoyed. Still got my logbook, 25 tonsillectomies as a houseman, and none of them bled to death, which some of them nearly did. And working with Tony Barnes was great. And the consultants that we worked with were all great role models. Jeff Slaney was around at that time, president of the Royal College of Surgeons.
Yeah,
John Temple, who became president of the Edinburgh
yeah,
College,
yeah.
was the program director as I was a registrar. Um, and there were a number of others who I could name, but all very formative point. And I enjoyed every job I did along the way.
And you decided on vascular surgery.
Well, I don't know if you decided what you were going to do, but I don't think you do that. I think in training, you probably enjoy every job you did. And I did orthopedics, which I loved, ENT, which I loved. I did a thoracics job, which I loved. And then you trip into a job and you get carried there by fate. There are two things: role models, the people you work with, and in our case, probably at that time, the opportunity to do research. And you fall into a research program. You write a thesis, and suddenly you're an expert in a tiny little
Yeah.
you know micron of surgical knowledge, and but you sort of become pigeonholed, and it's very difficult to swap specialties after that. And I work with great people. I, I mean, my two supervisors were Cliff Shearman, who you may well know, I regard as my principal mentor really in my surgical career, and a chap called Richard Downing, who was the senior lecturer for Jeff Slaney. He wouldn't mind me saying that he passed the big seven, but he is still active as a full-time consultant surgeon at Worcester. And his great tool was the Mayo scissors. I've never seen anybody use a set of Mayos better. And we did vascular plumbing operations that I'd never heard of,
And in those
fluoroscopy.
days, it was, I mean, I did a vascular fellowship myself, similar sort of background to you, but in those days, it was plumbing because it was really, certainly for me, it was endovascular was not really a thing. I mean, it was still mostly open surgery and the technique was there, it was all technique of plumbing and that's why I did it, if you're now at the end of your vascular career, per se, and it's now hugely endovascular.
Yeah.
Did you fall in love with the endovascular, or did you think, yeah, this is not what I started out to do, or not what I
It,
wanted to do?
it, it's not what I started out to do. And if I may just take one step back, John, I was very lucky. I did a Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh traveling fellowship to the States. I went to Boston and I saw Frank Legerfo and Frank Pomposelli doing femdistals, Andy Whittemore doing thoracic surgery, and then out to Colorado to see David Roos doing thoracic outlet, then up Seattle, Eugene Strandness to do his vascular lab with Alex Klaus and carotid, and finally UCLA with Wes Moore and Sam Arn, who were doing the very first endovascular operations.
Right.
But when I saw repair of a 3.5 centimeter aneurysm, my eyebrows rose slightly. And I eventually came back and, with the support of my colleagues, I did the first endovascular graft in Bristol with the radiologist. We always work with the radiologist. But although I had achieved a certain competence at that level, my junior colleagues are far superior at me at endovascular surgery, and most of my life was based around open surgery. And I've ended up spending more time doing thoracic outlet surgery, in which you do see a lot of the anatomy,
Yeah.
and I quite enjoy that.
But to get back to the question, though, if you were a youngster starting out now, where it's largely endovascular, but much, I would say to some extent, much more intellectually challenging because it's technology, etc. Would you still want to do vascular surgery, or would you say no? I like the the open surgery piece.
I've always enjoyed open surgery, but that may be the era I came from.
Yeah,
I
of
think
course. Yeah.
every person coming into surgery inherits the health service they work with. So there's no point harking back to
Yeah.
what used to be. The surgery hour, I use the trainees, we should say residents now. The surgery our residents have nowadays is not the surgery that it will be in 10 years' time. And they should look to the future, harness the techniques that are available, and look at everything, all the opportunities they have, I think, along the way. And never look back and say something was better. They will have to harness endovascular, they'll have to harness robots. They may have to harness AI doing their operations for them while they sit in a corner and just supervise along the way.
Or at least, at the very least, telling them which operation to do.
Yeah, yeah.
So, training and travel. You landed in a job in Bristol.
Yeah.
Um, Serendipitously or deliberately
Well,
or a combination?
uh, probably a bit of both. And he would have been round at your time. I was an SR in Bristol. Then I went down to Exeter.
Yeah.
And I worked with Tom Irvin in Exeter in colorectal for 6 months.
TT, TT
You,
Irvin.
did you knew Tom?
Yeah.
Tom wouldn't mind me. I'm not sure how Tom is at the moment. I had 6 months with him and 6 months with Bruce Campbell and John Thompson in vascular. Tom had the good grace to have a small heart attack my first night on call with him. Uh, once we were on call and there was an aneurysm which I had to deal with, he was admitted to the CCU. And the next day I was called in by his consultant colleagues who said they didn't envisage getting a locum in. Would I let them know if I ran into trouble? So I had, it probably wasn't best for the patients, but I had a great time doing a load of colorectal surgery for that 6 months, largely with the help of consultants who bobbed in and out when I felt I needed a hand. But that was great. And then I went back to Bristol, and John Farndon, who you would have known well along the way,
Very well.
contemporary, was trying to set up an academic unit with Derek Alderson as his colleague, with a senior lecturer in each subspecialty, and I seemed to be the chosen senior lecturer for vascular, and they appointed me, and I was very grateful. And I worked with two excellent colleagues, Roger Baird and Peter Lamont, both of whom were presidents of the Vascular Society along the way.
Yeah, Peter and I sat on the SAC together for a number of years. And I just for the accuracy, I hasten to add John Farndon was significantly older than me.
Yeah, well, yes. Yes, and for those who didn't know him, because he's left a marked influence still in the department of that. John, who was destined, I think, for great things. He was president-elect of ASGBI, would probably have gone on to college work and done other things. He died prematurely, really, at the age of 55,
Yeah.
having been quite stressed out by changes in the surgical department and the nature of surgery in Bristol.
More than one person said that I remember. I mean, it was a tragic loss because he was a remarkable individual. As editor-in-chief of the BJS, he was one of the few, and probably one of the last editors who literally edited your paper. And
Yes.
we would all live in fear of receiving a paper back that had that stamp on the side that said, "I have edited your paper for you," etc. A sad loss, actually, and a very good human being.
I mean, you will remember the days where you had to show your face and be overtly keen as a trainee. So I used to go in early in the mornings, and you get there at 6, and his office light would be on, and only one car in the car park, and it would be his car, and he'd be editing. And I heard that when you did have your paper edited, it would come back with red marks down the
Yes.
So you'd make the changes, send it back, and you get another set of red marks because he'd edit out the changes again. But he was great to work with. And
like a lot of people who did that type of editing, one of the more annoying aspects of it was that he was usually correct.
Yeah. We had a lot of respect for him, and he was very generous in terms of how he dealt with the trainees, students, and I don't think there was anybody who didn't have respect for him.
Yeah. So there you are as a young guy starting with a group of people wanting to change the world. Where did you see yourself being? What was your ambition then? I mean, I'm guessing your ambition then is different to your ambition now.
Well, I think, John, that comment in my yearbook was completely presumptuous, because most of the time as a junior surgeon training, you spend trying to survive and get your next job along the way. But so I got my job as a senior lecturer, and as you know, you first build a practice, then you spend time trying to control the practice at the end, and you develop outside interests. And I was employed by the university as a senior lecturer, so I'd got university stuff to do, surgical stuff to do. We were busy surgically, 3 of us doing vascular. Early on, John said, would I mind doing his vascular on call when he got cases? And then he appointed a breast senior lecturer who didn't do any vascular. So I got the breast senior lecturer's vascular on call as well. So it was fairly full-time clinical sort of episode, but that was very good because we did a lot of operating and big open operations. We had great trainees, senior registrars who came to the BRI. And I didn't really see where things were going. I was introduced to various surgical organisations. I've always felt that having an interest in as you've had all your life, in interests in organisations outside your immediate practice is good, your specialty association. So I spent a bit of time on the Vascular Society Council. I was elected as the RSPA to ASGBI. I was introduced by a consultant colleague, Zen Rater, to the section of surgery at the Royal Society of Medicine, which became my travelling club for a while, the Venus Forum at the Royal Society of Medicine, and the SRS, which you and I have had quite a lot to do with over the years.
Yeah.
So all of that was fun. And then early on, an interest in the college. I was lucky enough to be appointed as the basic surgical skills tutor under Bill Thomas, who was a great mentor and whose books I'd read, his education, when I was trying to do my fellowship.
Yeah.
And Martin Coomer was there at that stage. So we had a ball taking basic surgical skills courses around the world and within the United Kingdom and rewriting the course.
Very successful entity. I remember as a trainee that the books that we all used were Jeff Smitty's books, and then the next generation of book, if you like, was Bill Thomas's, et cetera, and the I remember running one of the first basic surgical skills courses in Hull when I was, it was they were very, very successful things, and Martin was a stalwart for all of that. Yeah. So when you dipped your toe in the water of the college, yeah. Did you have an ambition, or were you just wide-eyed and exploring?
Wide-eyed. I mean, like you, I had done a demonstrator's job in Edinburgh between house jobs and my first surgical rotation. So I'd done the Edinburgh primary and, as an insurance, the Glasgow primary. And I ended up doing both of those fellowships, and then came back to England. They said, well, you better do the English fellowship. So I did the English fellowship. And in later years, I spent a lot of time examining for your colleagues in Dublin. So I've got the Irish Fellowship as well. And I think it's a great thing to have affiliation to all of those colleges, because you feel at home in every city when you go. But I had no ambitions along the way at all with respect to the college. And again, it's all fate. It's what happens along the way. I mean, what you would say, I'm sure, as I would say, the more you put into anything, the more you get out of it. And I didn't get my fellowship in the English college the first time. I was one of the people whose number was not called out and made an ignominious exit through the doors, coming back for a later sitting. And so, at that point you think, God, this is just an expense and it's an anxiety. And what you don't realize is that your life becomes wrapped up in it in many other ways. The basic surgical skills, the regional special, then ICBSE, and I did stuff there. I was introduced that through David Ward to ICBSE. And then you get wrapped up as an examiner. I think I got onto the Court of Examiners in 2000, so I've done that for 25 years. And then with ICBSE, you get invited to the Joint Surgical Colleges meeting, and you work with the chairs of JCST and JCIE.
Okay, now, Frank, you're going to have to, for those listening around.
I know the acronyms.
Yes, you're going to have, so start with those three.
Okay, I mean, I was an examiner for a long time, and then at some stage I got invited or had to apply for a role in terms of how the MRCS works, our basic surgical examination for training, the gateway really to higher surgical training. And I spent some time on that board looking at the syllabus, blueprinting that to the curriculum, and so the
intercollegiate board of
basic surgical examinations.
Okay.
And then in 2017, I was interviewed for the post of chair of that by the 4 presidents who decide who sits in that chair. So that's the basic set of surgical examinations. The higher surgical examination, the FRCS, is the Joint Collegiate or the Joint Committee on Intercollegiate Examinations, JCIE, and JCST is the body that controls the Joint Colleges Surgical Training Organisation. And those people, the chairs of all of those people, sit with the 4 presidents, the vice presidents, and the chief executives on 4 meetings a year at which they look at the way British and Irish surgery is going. And that's always an enormous privilege. So I sat on that, or I've sat on that now for 5 years in total, and that's been a great privilege. You've seen several different presidents. You begin to understand the identities of the colleges and how they contribute to the whole thing, and it's a big privilege.
It's interesting to see when you look at the 4 colleges. Every college has its slate of presidents, and I think it would be perfectly reasonable to suggest that not every president is as good as every other president over the years, and that's as you would expect. And it's fascinating to see that over this period of time, the college in Ireland had a couple of interestingly, innovative people. Edinburgh had, and they all come and go, if you like, in terms of the ones that leave a different impact, and that, they all leave a little bit of their own personal identity as well.
Yes, they do. And I've been privileged not to work with presidents of various colleges at arm's length, but in our college, I've been very privileged to work, I think, with Tim Mitchell over these last 3 years, who's been a superb president, both in his understanding of politics and how the health service is evolving at a very difficult time, really, in the health service, but also in his dealings with people, how he conducts himself, and how he really empowers and takes people forward. So that's been a pleasure along the way. It's great to work with Neil Mortensen and Derek Alderson before that, and Claire Marks, before that. And everyone brings something different to the table, as you say.
Yeah, Claire, much missed Claire. She and I were young consultants in St. Mary's at the same time, and indeed we both left St. Mary's the same day, actually. She was a good friend. So it's a good segue then. We'll move away, distance you from detailed comment about the colleges. That would be inappropriate, of course. But let me ask you a more general question. Do you think, are you confident, optimistic for the future of surgery in the NHS and surgeons in the NHS? As a general sentiment.
The answer to that basically is yes. The patient population of the United Kingdom and of the world are going to need good doctors who understand interventional procedures. Until the time we discover medications that will alter the course of disease, particularly cancer, and maybe that's coming, and a surgeon, as you know, is not just somebody who operates with their hands. It's all about decision making, about process, about communication skills, understanding, and empathy. And I think there'll always be a role for that kind of doctor. Our involvement technically with operations may change over the future. New computer skills may change things, robotics may change things, but into the foreseeable future, I'm confident that we will need people who can still be called surgeons, who will have to understand anatomy, pathology, and the benefit of interventions to help deal with those pathologies.
You see, though, I absolutely agree with that, obviously, but it's not necessarily the world, and this is not just the NHS, I mean, in the United States as well, it's not as nurturing and as comfortable an environment to be in as it was in decades past. Now, I hasten to add that I'm not suggesting, we should be talking about the good old days, because the good old days were not that good in many respects. But the doctors tended to be valued a little more for making the effort they made under difficult circumstances, whereas in both sides of the Atlantic, it's not necessarily that's not necessarily true, or is that just me? Do you sense that?
I sense that. I would turn that on its head a little bit and say that if you were a patient, what would you want to see in your doctor? And that's the way I would look at it. And I think the values of the good doctor are just the same, and the needs of the patient are just the same. Our systems are changing, our demography is changing, patients are getting older, we're going to have a much larger patient population. Technology has improved. So, in our day, perhaps every 90-year-old who came through the front door didn't get an MRI scan as their first investigation. But that costs. And how we fund healthcare, particularly in the United Kingdom, may have to change in the future. I've got no solutions for that. It's an unpalatable political prospect. No party wants to tackle that. But how we deal with our social healthcare and how we set up the NHS to survive into the future has to be considered very carefully.
Yeah, and I think most people would agree that the NHS per se is not the problem. The funding of the NHS is the problem, regardless of political party, because, anything that deviates from the mantra of the NHS, free at the point of delivery, regardless, universal healthcare, it is political death. And so you spend decades refusing to have the conversation that everyone knows you're meant to have. As you say, I don't have the problem. I don't have the solution to it either.
And we have to consider, if I may, looking out with just healthcare. We're in a geopolitical climate that means that we have to look at other things. I would say in Western Europe, we have to look at our defense spending. We have to look at all the other things that are important to the population. And world economics, and you're living in a place in which you may have significant influence, or at least the country you're living in has a significant influence in some of our political decisions. In the last week, our medicines pricing in the United Kingdom has gone up to 25% by 25%. The threshold for drug purchasing has changed, and those are due to a large extent by geopolitical considerations.
No, I agree. I saw recently in a conversation with some colleagues in Birmingham that their funding had just been pulled as the government had decided that they were forced to spend more on defence because of pressure from the other side of the Atlantic. We live in a global environment for sure. No doubt about that. Last thing before we pivot onto some more light-hearted issues. Today, do you think surgical training is fit for purpose?
Well, I have a son who is a trainee orthopedic surgeon who's married to a trainee pediatrician. They've just had their first child, who's 2 weeks old. So I'm potentially biased, but I have a certain insight into how trainees are feeling. I don't think training has all the answers. I couldn't comment really on the United States at the moment, where I think things are possibly a lot better. We have a lot of problems. You will know Chris Whitty and Steve Powis has just completed the first phase of the training review in the United Kingdom. That's demonstrated and highlighted. In fact, all it's done really so far is highlighted many of the problems that exist in training. There are bottlenecks akin to the lost tribe, really, of Kalman's time in the United Kingdom. Trainees are not respected well in hospitals. They don't have the regard that we had when we were trainees. They're not looked after well. They find it difficult to transfer across deaneries if their spouse, for instance, is in a different deanery. They're not sure of their progression. There is less time for trainers to train, and that has to be considered. So we're going into a phase 2 in the United Kingdom, looking at how we might influence training. The trainees have got to have a big say in that. And I was at a meeting this week, which was looking at phase 2, how we progress, with the president of the British Orthopaedic Training Association and the Association of Surgeons in Training included. And they have to help us drive this forward. We have to look for good ideas from around the world, because how we train probably has to change. We have to have guaranteed training opportunities along the way. And that has to be our priority. Otherwise, you and I will not have surgeons to look after us into our dotage.
But of course, it's fundamentally in conflict with the need to deliver deliver services, and
it's the balance of service and training. But there is no reason, I think, why we can't incorporate a degree of training into service commitments, provided things are supervised. You and I probably did training lists along the way, where we were providing service and were supervised to a certain extent. And those sort of initiatives have to come back into play.
Yeah. All right. Let's pivot on to a few less weighty issues. So, what talent would you love to have that you don't have?
Talent. This is not a superpower, I take it.
Well, you can choose that if you so desire.
It'd be nice to be able to fly without wings, and that would be my thing. What talent? That's a difficult one, John. Probably the ability to analyze a problem more easily, without in a way AI might do it now. But I'd like to have the innate AI. I think that would be great.
Well, that's a sort of a segue to ask the question, what, in your career, the big thing was the advent of interventional radiology and interventional vascular radiology. What do you think the next big thing will be? I suppose that I've set it up for you by the mention of, or your mention of AI, but what do you think the next big thing is going to be in 10 to 15 years?
In medicine, you mean? Along the way? Probably the design of medications. I think I've just taken on a role with NICE as a non-executive director. So I'm on a massive learning curve, because what I don't know about medicines fills entire therapeutics textbooks. So I'm having to learn a lot about medicines, but I think possibly the ability of AI to deal with the genome, genetics, and to deal with pharmaceuticals and drugs is likely to be the way that, or the biggest influence on medicine in the very near future. I can't predict what will happen next year, let alone 5 years from now. But I think it's going to have an enormous influence.
Do you have a bucket list
of
things you want to do before they put you in the ground or in the furnace?
Well, all my life I've had inordinately good support from my wife. So I'd like to do a few things she'd like to do with respect to traveling and things like that.
Well, you are, of course, legally obliged to say that.
Yeah, she's sitting behind me with a gun at the moment. No, she's not actually, but yeah, I am legally obliged to say that. And I've just had my first grandchild, so I think maybe I could be I'd like to be a better grandparent than I was parent, probably. Along the way,
I think that would be something that most surgeons can say. I think surgeons tend to be better grandparents than parents. At least in my generation, your generation. I think it's a little different now, and a good thing too, though.
I'd like to drive one of those cars on the wall behind you, John. So I think I have to come back to you. I enjoy the odd track day, but tell me about one or two. There's an E-type in one of your previous things on a desert road, I think, somewhere. But those look like...
yeah, so the E-type is here. This one here.
Okay, yeah, the E-type's over there somewhere.
Yeah, so I drove that across country with my son for charity from San Francisco to Florida.
Fantastic.
Which was quite a thing. I had, it was a COVID build. It's a car that was restored from a shed. It was found in a shed and restored, and we drove it across country. It was a good experience.
Yeah.
and I don't have it anymore. But I have another E-type, and I have a couple of other little things, you know.
Yeah. And one on the other wall, there are one or two nice looking cars up
Here
there.
or this one
No,
here.
that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This was a friend's car, Maserati 250F, multi-million-dollar car. He kindly let me drive at the Goodwood Revival. I did it a couple of times, and this here was a pre-war Grand Prix car that tried to kill me at the revival in the pouring rain. And this was also a friend's car, a very famous Formula One car. The rest of the ones over here were mine,
Okay.
etc. So,
Well, I will share the Goodwood Revival with you because we attend it every year, and
I missed it this year, but I'm hoping, with a bit of luck, I might have a drive next year, actually. So we shall see. Football or rugby?
rugby, I'm afraid, but not avidly.
Beer or wine?
Both. And gin.
Not necessarily in that order. Have you ever asked anyone for an autograph?
The last autograph I got, I can remember, and I got two. I think I only ever had two. Ken Rosewall and Rod Laver in an exhibition match.
Wow. Bizarrely, I got Ken Rosewall's autograph when he was playing in Dublin, actually, along with Mike Sangsters. It was another sort of name from the past.
I will tell you, I once asked Kevin Bernand to sign his book for me. I bought his book on venous pathologies. I thought he'd write a nice little comment in the front of it. I got home and I opened it up to find a little missive there saying, "Thank you for contributing to my royalties." And that. So I have got Kevin Bernand's autograph as well.
I was told when I was a registrar that the late John Gallagher was turning up to the department, and his former secretary told me, and she was there, and I said, "Well, I'll bring my book and he'll sign it for me. You know, he's Irish, and you know I'm Irish, etc., etc." And so he was, as you know, quite a polarizing character, and slightly odd, I think you might say. So I brought the book and I said, "Oh, Professor, I wonder if you'd be kind enough to sign it. It would be true honor." To which he said, "Don't be ridiculous," and walked off. And he never did.
The final one I did get, another one I really valued, was Harold Ellis's book on his clinical anatomy book, which I got him to sign in the hall of the Royal College of Surgeons in England when he was just passing through one day. I've treasured that.
That was a good thing. I didn't get him to sign my, but I did get Jerry Kirk to sign my book as well. A book that saved my life and several other people's lives.
The operations book.
Favorite food?
Oh, goodness. My wife's duck, I think. Beef Wellington. My wife's beef Wellington. There you go.
Okay, there you go. Very good. Now, seeing when your wife is making the beef Wellington for a dinner party on Friday, you have 2 spare seats around the table, and you can invite anyone from history, dead or alive, 2 of them.
Yeah, probably John F. Kennedy.
Okay.
Be one of them. And you'll hate this. Margaret Thatcher. How about that? Put them 2 together and see how they get on. I wouldn't ask Reagan and Thatcher. They'd have too good a time and would exclude everybody from conversation. But you know, if we want to throw the pigeons in there as well, maybe Enoch Powell instead. We'll see how that went.
Altogether, they would make an interesting dinner party. I think you would have found it very easy to retire to the kitchen and just let them get on with it, because none of them were truly in need of a partner to speak.
No. So they're just off the top of my head, but they're could have been any combination of people.
Oh, sure, for sure. Well, Frank, thank you. I want to thank you so much again for spending the time with me. Very enjoyable.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
No, it's a pleasure, and we shall hope that you continue to find that the parachute opens as required.
I've always hoped that, and it's worked so far.